The cake was already sweating by the time we sang. Buttercream slumped at the edges, softening under the dining room lights, the candles leaning slightly like they were tired of standing upright. Vanilla and sugar hung in the air, thick enough to taste. My mother sat at the head of the table, hands folded, posture perfect, the way she always sat when she wanted the room to orbit her. 62 candles. Someone joked that it was a fire hazard. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. I always did. "Make a wish," my aunt said, clapping softly, like she was ushering a child toward a moment that mattered. My mom closed her eyes. The room quieted. Phones lifted, ready to capture it. The version of her people liked to remember. The warm mother, the woman who sacrificed, the center. She leaned forward and blew. Applause followed, polite and automatic. And then, smiling, still seated, still holding the knife loosely in her hand, she said it. "I wish I didn't have to see you every day." The room laughed again. A ripple, a few sharp bursts. Someone snorted into their napkin. It took a second for the sentence to land. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her eyes skimmed the table, waiting for the reaction, for approval, for the confirmation that it was funny enough to be forgiven. I felt it first in my chest, a tightness, quick and hot, then in my throat, like something rising that I had to swallow back down before it embarrassed me. I smiled, not a big smile, just enough, the kind I'd practiced for years, the kind that said, "I'm fine, you didn't hurt me. Keep going." "Don't worry," I said lightly. "I'm working on that." A beat. Someone laughed louder than before. Relief laughter. My brother exhaled. My aunt reached for the cake knife like she was rescuing the moment. Plates clinked. Conversation resumed. The party moved on. But something inside me didn't. I'd been living with my mother for 11 months. Not because I wanted to, because after my divorce, after the apartment I couldn't afford alone anymore, after the quiet panic of realizing I didn't have a backup plan that didn't involve her, she'd insisted. "Just for a little while," she'd said. "You'll get back on your feet." She told everyone that part, how generous she was, how she'd opened her home. What she didn't tell them was how carefully she made sure I felt like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The rules changed daily. The temperature of the house shifted depending on her mood. Some mornings she'd ask if I slept well, offer coffee, tell me about a dream she'd had. Other mornings she'd walk past me like I was furniture, sighing loudly as she cleaned an already clean counter. I learned to read her like weather. I learned to make myself small. That night, after the cake was cut and the gifts opened, and the last guest lingered longer than necessary, I stacked plates at the sink, while my mother sat back down, nursing a glass of wine. The kitchen light was too bright. It always was. She liked it that way. Nothing hidden. "You didn't have to say that," she said casually, not looking at me. "What that?" I asked. She shrugged. "That things aren't good." I almost laughed. Almost. "I was joking," she added. "You know that." I nodded. I always nodded. Later, in my childhood bedroom, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling fan, the same fan that had hummed above me when I was 17, when she'd told me I wanted to move out for college and she'd cried for 3 days straight, the same fan that had watched me pack and unpack my life more times than I cared to count. I replayed her words, not the wish itself, the ease of it, the way it slid out of her mouth like something she'd been holding for a while. I thought about how often she said things like that, wrapped in humor, delivered with a smile. How if I reacted, I was too sensitive. How if I stayed quiet, it was proof that it wasn't that bad. I thought about how tired I was. The next morning, she was already awake when I came downstairs. Her hair was done. She wore the cardigan she liked to wear when she wanted to appear calm and reasonable. "I made eggs," she said, "if you want some." I hesitated, then sat. She watched me eat, not openly, just enough to feel it. "You know," she said, stirring her coffee, "I never expected you'd still be here this long." There it was again. Casual, observational, like she was commenting on the weather. "I know," I said. "You just seem stuck," she continued. "At some point, you have to move on." I chewed slowly, swallowed. "I'm working. I'm saving." She nodded. "Well, just make sure you're actually doing something. I don't want this to turn into a permanent situation." Permanent. The word landed heavy. After breakfast, I drove to work with the radio off. My phone buzzed at a red light. A text from my cousin. "Your mom cracks me up. She's brutal." I stared at the message until the light turned green. At work, I smiled. I answered emails. I laughed at the right moments. I went to the bathroom twice just to breathe. That afternoon, my manager called me into her office. She was kind. Too kind. The kind of kindness that comes with a soft landing. "We're restructuring," she said. "Your role is being eliminated." I nodded. I thanked her. And I walked out with a folder and a numb feeling that started behind my eyes and spread. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, my mother's car was already there. The house lights glowed warmly through the windows. From the outside, it looked like safety. Inside, she was watching television, a cooking show. She didn't turn it off when I walked in. "How was work?" she asked. I stood there for a second, keys still in my hand. "I got laid off," I said. She muted the TV. "Oh," she said. Then, after a pause, "Well, that's not ideal." I waited. She sighed. "This is exactly what I was worried about." Something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough. "I didn't plan this," I said. She gave me a look. "No one plans these things, but this is why you shouldn't rely on other people." I felt my face heat. "I'm not relying on you. I'm trying to get back on my feet." She leaned back. "I just don't want to be responsible for you forever." Forever. Again. That night, I sat in my car in the driveway long after turning the engine off. I watched the house, the curtains, the way the light flicked off in her bedroom before mine. I thought about the wish. I thought about how she'd said it like a joke, because jokes don't require accountability. I thought about how I'd smiled, because smiling kept the peace. And I thought for the first time not about how to make things better, but about how to leave. Not dramatically, not angrily, deliberately. I went inside, packed my work bag for the next day out of habit, then stopped. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I pulled up my resume. It hadn't been updated in years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Downstairs, I heard the TV click back on, laughter from a canned audience. I started typing. Not fast, not perfectly, but with a quiet certainty I hadn't felt in a long time. Because when my mother said she wished she didn't have to see me every day, she thought she was expressing a mild inconvenience. She had no idea she was naming the moment I finally stopped pretending this was temporary and started making it so. The house felt different once the idea of leaving settled into me. Not lighter, not calmer, just exposed. Like I'd peeled back a layer I'd spent years reinforcing, and suddenly everything underneath was too close to the surface. Every sound registered sharper. Every sigh carried meaning. Even the way my mother set her mug down in the morning felt deliberate, like punctuation in a sentence she was writing for me to read. I woke early the next day, before her alarm. The sky outside my window was still gray, the kind of gray that pretends it's neutral, but always leans cold. I lay there for a moment, listening. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the faint tick of the hallway clock, the house breathing. I used to think this room was safe. When I was little, I'd hide under the covers with a flashlight and read until my eyes hurt. When I was a teenager, I'd sit on the floor against the door, knees pulled to my chest, waiting for the sound of her footsteps to pass by. Different reasons, same posture. I got up quietly and dressed for a job I no longer had. Old habits die hard. In the kitchen, she was already there, hair wrapped in a towel, robe tied tightly, scrolling on her phone. She glanced up when I reached for the coffee pot. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She hummed. "Well, you'll have plenty of time now." It wasn't cruel, not overtly. That was the problem. Everything she said lived in that space where if you called it out, you sounded dramatic, where the words themselves weren't sharp, but the accumulation was. I poured coffee anyway. "I'm going to start applying today," I said. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I wanted credit. Maybe I wanted reassurance. Maybe I wanted her to say something kind enough to contradict the wish she'd made the night before. She nodded. "Good, you should treat it like a full-time job." "I know. And you'll need to be realistic," she added. "You can't be picky right now." I swallowed. "I'm not planning to be." She smiled then, a tight smile. "Just saying." I took my mug upstairs and closed my door. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. I sat on the bed and opened my laptop again. The resume stared back at me, half-finished. My name at the top, a list of jobs that looked more impressive on paper than they had felt in my body. I sent out 3 applications before noon, then 5 more. Then I started tailoring cover letters, changing words, reshaping myself into whatever I thought each company wanted. By mid-afternoon, my shoulders ached from hunching over the keyboard. My eyes burned. Around 4, my phone buzzed. A text from my brother. "Heard about work. That sucks." I stared at it. "Mom told me." Another message followed. "She's worried." I closed my eyes. She always did this, framed herself as the concerned party, the reluctant bearer of my failures. She never told them how she spoke to me, only how much she carried. "I'm handling it," I typed back. A minute passed. "Well, you know how she gets. Try not to take it personally." I let the phone fall onto the bed beside me. That night at dinner, she served chicken and rice. The same meal she'd made 100 times before. Comfort food, she called it. I wondered who it was supposed to comfort. "So," she said halfway through chewing, "have you heard back from anyone?" "It's been a day." "I know, I just mean, anything promising?" I shook my head. She sighed. Again. "Maybe this is a sign," she said. "A sign of what?" She shrugged. "That you need to rethink some things. Your direction." I felt something tighten behind my ribs. My direction? "Yes, you've always been stubborn, set on doing things your way." I laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it." She looked at me. Really looked. "I'm just saying, maybe if you'd listened more, you wouldn't be in this position." There it was, the familiar pivot, the way everything eventually circled back to my fault. "I listened," I said. "I always listened." She waved her fork dismissively. "You heard. That's different." I didn't reply. What was the point? This conversation had happened in a dozen variations over the years. The details changed. The conclusion didn't. After dinner, I washed the dishes while she watched television. I could feel her presence behind me, even without looking. When I finished and turned around, she was standing in the doorway. "You know," she said, "when I was your age, I had 2 kids and a mortgage." I nodded. "I know. And I didn't have the luxury of falling apart," she continued. "I did what I had to do." "I'm not falling apart." She tilted her head. "Are you sure?" That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay there listening to the house, my mind replaying old scenes like they were queued up, waiting for the quiet. Me at 12, standing in the kitchen while she listed everything I'd done wrong that week. Me at 16, crying because she'd read my journal and told me I was ungrateful. Me at 22, coming home from college and realizing I no longer fit into the version of me she preferred. Me at 38, back in my childhood bedroom, being reminded, daily, that my presence was a burden. Sometime after midnight, I opened my notes app and started writing things down. Not feelings, facts. How often she commented on my presence. How often she framed my struggles as inconvenience. How rarely she asked how I was without following it with advice or criticism. I didn't know why I was doing it. I just knew I needed something solid, something that didn't shift depending on her mood. The next few days blurred together. Applications, rejections, silence. Each morning she asked, each evening she sighed, each night I retreated to my room and reminded myself that this was temporary. On the 5th day, she knocked on my door. I opened it to find her holding a laundry basket. "I need you to start doing your laundry on Sundays. It's easier for me." "I already do my own laundry." "Yes, but you use the machine during the week. It throws off my routine." I stared at her. "I use it once or twice." She pursed her lips. "Still." "Okay," I said. "And maybe you could start looking for somewhere else, just in case." Just in case. That night, I looked up apartments, studios I couldn't afford, rooms for rent with strangers, short-term sublets, anything that didn't involve her kitchen, her size, her wishes. I sent a message to an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years.
"Hey," I wrote, "this is random, but do you know anyone looking for a roommate?" She replied almost immediately, "Actually, yes. Can I call you?" We talked for an hour. She told me about a small place on the other side of town. Not fancy, not permanent, but available. "I can't promise anything," she said, "but it could be a start." When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I didn't tell my mother. Not yet. The next morning, she cornered me in the kitchen. "I've been thinking," she said, "maybe it would be better if you stayed with your brother for a bit." My stomach dropped. "He lives 2 hours away." "I know, but it might motivate you." Motivate you. I looked at her, really looked, at the way her face tightened when I didn't immediately agree, at the impatience under the concern. "I'm not moving again," I said. Her eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" "I said I'm not moving again," I repeated. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I'm working on something." She crossed her arms. "Working on what?" "Getting out," I said. The silence that followed was heavy, dense. "You don't need to rush," she said finally. "I was just making a suggestion." "I know." She studied me, like she was trying to see how serious I was. Then she smiled. "Of course," she said lightly. "Do whatever you think is best." But her eyes didn't match her words. That afternoon, I got an email, an interview request. Not my dream job, not even close, but a conversation. I read it 3 times. That evening, at dinner, she asked again, "Anything new?" "Yes," I said. "I have an interview." Her smile was immediate, too quick. "See? Things always work out." I nodded. Sometimes. That night, lying in bed, I realized something. She liked me hopeful. Hopeful meant patient. Hopeful meant quiet. Hopeful meant I stayed. What she didn't expect was that hope, this time, wasn't tethered to her house. And when she'd made that wish, when she'd said she didn't want to see me every day, she hadn't realized she was giving me permission, not to disappear, but to stop trying to belong where I never really had. And I was closer than she thought. The interview was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. I dressed like it mattered more than it probably did. A blouse I hadn't worn in years, shoes that pinched slightly, reminding me with every step that I was still adjusting. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like someone trying again. Downstairs, my mother noticed immediately. "You look nice," she said, surprised. Then, almost reflexively, "What's the occasion?" "I told you, interview." "Oh, right." She hesitated. "Good luck." The words sounded correct, the tone didn't.
I drove away with my shoulders tight, jaw clenched, my mind rehearsing answers, while another part of me kept replaying her birthday wish like a loop I couldn't mute. I told myself it didn't matter, that this was about me, not her. But when you grow up calibrating yourself to someone else's comfort, disentangling feels like learning to walk again. The interview itself went fine. The woman across from me was professional, pleasant, distant in the way people are when they haven't decided if you matter yet. We talked about experience, about flexibility, about culture. When she asked why I'd left my last job, I told the truth, but gently. Restructuring, priority shifting. She nodded, like she'd heard it 100 times. When it was over, I walked back to my car with the strange mix of relief and dread that comes from having done something that might change your life, or might amount to nothing at all. My phone buzzed as I pulled out of the parking lot. "How'd it go?" my mother texted. I stared at the screen. "Okay," I typed, then erased it. "Fine," I typed instead. A few seconds passed. "Well," she replied, "don't get your hopes up." I dropped the phone into the passenger seat like it had burned me. That night, she was in a mood. I could tell the moment I walked in. Cabinets closed a little harder, the television louder than necessary. She didn't look up when I greeted her. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, "if you want it." I waited until we were both seated to say it. "I might have a place to stay," I said. "Temporarily." Her fork clinked against the plate. "What do you mean?" "A friend. She knows someone looking for a roommate." Her fork clinked against the plate. "And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't want to say anything until I knew more." She frowned. "That feels secretive." "It's not." "You live here," she said. "I think I'm entitled to know what's going on." Entitled. "I wasn't hiding anything," I said carefully. "I just didn't want to get ahead of myself." She leaned back in her chair. "So when were you planning to leave?" "I don't know yet." She scoffed. "Convenient." The word hung between us. "I thought you wanted me to leave," I said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what I said." "You said you wished you didn't have to see me every day." She waved her hand. "That was a joke. God, are you still on that?" I felt something crack. Not explosively, not dramatically, just enough to let the truth seep through. "It didn't feel like a joke," I said. She stared at me, incredulous. "You're being ridiculous." Maybe. Or maybe I was finally hearing her clearly. After dinner, I went upstairs and closed my door. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I felt hollow, like something had been scooped out and left clean. The anger I expected never arrived. Just clarity. The next few days were tense, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. She started leaving the house more, running errands she didn't need to run, staying out later than usual. When she was home, she watched me closely, like she was waiting for me to slip up, to prove her right. I got a second interview, then a third. Each time I mentioned it, she reacted the same way. Brief interest, immediate caution. A reminder not to count on anything. "It's competitive out there," she'd say. "People your age don't always bounce back." People your age. As if time itself were something I'd mismanaged. One evening, I overheard her on the phone in the living room. I was halfway down the stairs when her voice drifted up. "She's still here," she said. "Yes, I know. I didn't expect it to last this long either." I froze. "I'm trying to be supportive," she continued, "but you know how she is, sensitive, takes everything personally." My hands curled into fists. "I just hope she figures something out soon," she added. "I can't keep putting my life on hold." I backed up the stairs slowly, quietly, my heart pounding. I shut my door and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. Putting her life on hold. That was new. Or maybe it wasn't. I thought back to all the times she'd framed my existence as an interruption. The sighs, the jokes, the way she told stories about me that always ended with her patience. I opened my notes app again.
She says she's supportive. She sounds resentful. She tells others I'm a burden. She tells me she's helping. Writing it down didn't hurt as much as I expected. It felt like collecting evidence, but not for a confrontation, for myself. That weekend, I went to see the apartment. It was small, a second-floor walk-up. The floors creaked, the bathroom was barely big enough to turn around in, but the window let in light, and the woman who lived there smiled when she showed me around. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's quiet." Quiet sounded like luxury. "I'd need a decision soon," she added gently. "I've had a lot of interest." I nodded. "I understand." On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. "Any updates?" my mother texted. I didn't answer. That night, she confronted me. "You've been distant," she said, standing in my doorway without knocking. "I've been busy." "With what?" she demanded. "Trying to move forward." She crossed her arms. "You're shutting me out." I almost laughed. "I live in your house." "That doesn't mean you get to disappear emotionally," she snapped. There it was, the real issue. "I don't know how to do this with you watching my every move," I said. She bristled. "You're my mother." "I know," I replied. "That's the problem." The silence that followed was sharp. "After everything I've done for you," she said slowly, "this is how you talk to me?" I met her eyes. "I didn't ask to be spoken about like a problem." She shook her head. "You're twisting things." "No," I said. "I'm finally hearing them." She left without another word. The next morning, I woke to an email. "We'd like to extend an offer." I read it once, then again, then the third time, just to be sure. It wasn't perfect. The pay was modest, the commute longer than I wanted, but it was something, a foothold. I went downstairs, heart pounding. "I got a job," I said. She looked up from her paper. "Oh, that's it?" I asked, surprised by my own disappointment. She smiled thinly. "I'm happy for you. I just hope it's stable." I nodded. "Me too." That afternoon, I called the woman with the apartment. "I'll take it," I said. There was a pause, then warmth in her voice. "Okay, let's talk details." When I hung up, my hands were shaking again, not from fear, from relief. That night, I told my mother I'd be moving out in 2 weeks. Her reaction was odd. First surprise, then offense, then relief she tried to hide. "Well," she said, "I guess this is for the best." I smiled, the practiced one, the old one. "Don't worry," I said, "you won't have to see me every day." She didn't laugh this time, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to make it easier for her. The last 2 weeks in my mother's house stretched longer than the 11 months before them. Once the decision was out loud, once there was a date attached to my leaving, everything shifted again. Not dramatically, not in ways she could be accused of, but in 1,000 subtle recalibrations that made it clear she was adjusting to a version of the future where I was no longer part of the scenery. She stopped asking questions, not just about my job or the move, but about me. The casual check-ins vanished. If I spoke, she listened politely, distantly, like someone humoring a coworker they wouldn't see much longer. It was almost worse than the criticism. Almost. The house felt like a waiting room. Boxes appeared in my room slowly. I packed at night, quietly, folding clothes I hadn't worn in years, rediscovering objects I'd carried through every phase of my life like proof that I existed independently of her. Ticket stubs, old notebooks, a chipped mug I'd bought myself after my divorce because I liked the color and no one else got a vote. Each item felt like a small reclaiming. She watched the boxes multiply with narrowed eyes, like she didn't quite trust that I was really going. "You're taking that?" she asked one afternoon, gesturing to a framed photo on my dresser. "Yes." She frowned. "I thought I gave that to you." "You did?" "Well, I just didn't expect you to want it." I looked at the photo. It was of me at 8 years old, missing 2 teeth, smiling awkwardly at the camera. I remembered the day it was taken, how she'd told me to stand still, how she'd corrected my posture, how I'd practiced that smile. "I do," I said. She didn't respond. The night before my first day at the new job, she knocked on my door again. This time she knocked twice, sharp. "I need to talk to you," she said. I stepped aside. She stood in the middle of the room, arms folded, eyes scanning the boxes like they offended her. "You're really doing this," she said. "Yes."
"So this is it," she continued. "You get back on your feet and suddenly you don't need me anymore." I felt a familiar pull in my chest, the old reflex, the urge to reassure, to soften. "I needed you," I said, "just not the way you wanted." Her eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "Maybe not," I replied, "but it's true." She shook her head slowly. "I opened my home to you." "And I'm grateful," I said. "That doesn't erase how it felt to live here." She scoffed. "You're rewriting history." "No," I said. "I'm remembering it differently." She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. And maybe she didn't. The version of me she'd known was quieter, more pliable. "Well," she said finally, "don't expect me to come running when things get hard again." I nodded. "I won't." She left without saying goodnight. I didn't sleep much, not from anxiety, though there was some of that, but from anticipation, the kind that vibrates under your skin. I lay there thinking about the apartment, about the quiet, about waking up without bracing myself. In the morning, she was already gone when I came downstairs. A note sat on the counter. "Good luck today." No signature. I stared at it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. The first day of work was overwhelming in the way new beginnings often are. Names, systems, expectations. I smiled until my cheeks hurt. I took notes obsessively. I laughed at jokes I didn't fully understand yet. But underneath it all was a steady hum of pride. I was doing this. When I got home that evening, she asked how it went. "Good," I said. "Really good." She nodded. "That's nice." And that was it. Moving day arrived quietly. No dramatic weather, no last-minute disasters, just a borrowed car, a friend who showed up early, and boxes that suddenly felt heavier than they had in my room. My mother stood in the doorway as I carried the last box out. "You forgot this," she said, handing me the note from the counter. I hadn't realized I'd left it on the table again. "Oh," I said. "Thanks." She hesitated. "You don't have to rush out." "I know." She nodded. "You'll call." "Yes." "Not just when you need something," she added. I met her eyes. "I'll call when I want to talk." Her mouth tightened. "Well," she said, stepping back, "take care of yourself." "I will." I waited. For a hug, a hand on my arm, something that acknowledged this moment mattered. Nothing came. I walked to the car. The apartment smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and someone else's cooking. My roommate, technically still a stranger, helped me carry things in, chatting easily, asking about my job, my commute, and my favorite coffee spots nearby. No judgment, no commentary, just curiosity. That first night, I sat on the floor eating takeout straight from the container. The place was quiet in a way that didn't feel lonely. The silence didn't press against me. It didn't ask anything of me. I slept like someone who'd been holding their breath for years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routines forming. Morning coffee in my own mug, evening walks just because I could, learning the sound of the building, the rhythm of a life that wasn't constantly monitored. My mother called once, then twice. The conversations were stiff. Polite, she asked about work. I gave her surface-level answers. She told me about a neighbor's new car, a sale at her favorite store, nothing personal. It felt like we were both waiting for the other to say something first. One Sunday afternoon, she showed up unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there,
purse clutched tightly, expression unreadable. "I was in the area," she said. I stepped aside. "Come in." She looked around, taking in the space. The couch, the bookshelf, the framed photo on the wall. "You made it homey," she said. "Thank you." She sat, hands folded in her lap. "I didn't realize it would be this soon." "This soon?" I asked. "You being settled." I sat across from her. "I needed to be." She sighed. "I suppose I underestimated you." The words landed strangely, not as an apology, not as praise, just observation. "Mom," I said carefully, "about your birthday." She waved her hand. "Let's not rehash that." "I think we should," I said. She stiffened. "Why?" "Because it mattered." She looked away. "I didn't mean it." "But you said it," I replied, "and I need you to understand that it wasn't harmless." She was quiet for a long time. "I was joking," she said finally. "People laughed." I smiled. "That doesn't mean it didn't hurt." She studied me like she was trying to decide whether this version of me was temporary. "I did my best," she said softly. "I know, and your best still hurt me." Her eyes filled with something, anger maybe, or fear. "You're very sure of yourself lately," she said. "I had to be. No one else was going to do it for me." She stood abruptly. "I should go." I walked her to the door. At the threshold, she paused. "You know, I never imagined things would turn out like this." "Neither did I said. "But here we are." She nodded once and left. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, not from regret, but from the effort of staying honest. Later that night, I thought about the wish again, about how she'd said she didn't want to see me every day, and how literal that had become. But now the distance wasn't punishment, it was space. Space to breathe, space to speak, space to exist without being edited. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for her approval to live my life. I was already living it, and I wasn't done yet. A month passed before I realized something had changed. Not in a dramatic movie scene way. There was no single morning where I woke up and thought, "I'm healed now." It was quieter than that, subtler. Like realizing you haven't checked for a bruise in a while because it no longer hurts when you touch it. Life settled. I learned the rhythm of my new job, the unspoken rules, the personalities, the pace. I learned which coworkers ate lunch at their desks and which ones needed to leave the building to breathe. I learned that I was competent, that I adapted faster than I'd been told I would, that my age wasn't a liability, it was a quiet advantage. At home, the apartment began to feel less borrowed, more mine. I hung curtains I liked. I bought a plant and kept it alive. I played music while cooking without worrying if it was too loud or too much or wrong somehow. Some nights I caught myself waiting for criticism, waiting for a comment, waiting for that familiar tightening in my chest that came from existing under someone else's scrutiny. But it didn't come, and when it didn't, something inside me slowly unclenched. My mother and I spoke once a week, always on Sundays, always brief. She asked about work, I asked about her health. We stayed on safe ground, like two people walking along a shoreline neither of us wanted to swim in yet. Until one Sunday, she didn't stick to the script. "I ran into your aunt," she said. "She says you seem different." I smiled to myself. "Different how?" She hesitated. "More confident." I waited. "And she said you seem happier," my mother added. "And?" I asked gently. "And I told her I was glad," she replied, too quickly. Silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just real. "I didn't think you'd manage this well," she said finally. There it was. Not an apology, not a confession, but closer than we'd ever gotten. "I didn't either," I admitted, "not at first." She sighed. "I worried you'd fail." "I know. I said. "I didn't want you to rely on me forever." "I wasn't going to. I just needed somewhere to land." Her voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "I suppose I didn't make that very easy. It wasn't the acknowledgement I'd fantasized about. There was no tearful reckoning, no sudden warmth, but it was something." "I need to tell you something," I said, heart beating faster. She went quiet. "When you said you wished you didn't have to see me every day, that stayed with me, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it clarified things." "Clarified?" she repeated. "Yes," I said. "It made me realize I'd been measuring my worth by how little space I took up in your life." She inhaled sharply. "You never meant—" "I know," I interrupted gently, "but intention isn't impact, and I need our relationship to change if it's going to continue." There was a long pause. I imagined her sitting at her kitchen table, fingers wrapped around her mug, eyes narrowed the way they did when she felt challenged. "What kind of change?" she asked. "I need you to stop treating my presence as a burden, and I need you to stop talking about me like one." Another pause. "That may take time," I replied. "I understand, but I won't go back to pretending it doesn't matter."
She exhaled slowly. "You've grown very firm." I smiled. I had to. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, heart racing, not with fear, but with something like relief. I'd said it. Not angrily, not defensively, just honestly. That night, I dreamed of my childhood home, but it was empty. Sunlight streamed through the windows, the furniture was gone, the walls bare. I walked through it without feeling lost. Weeks turned into months. My job stabilized. My confidence deepened. I stopped over-explaining myself to coworkers, to friends, to strangers. I noticed how often I'd once apologized for things that didn't require apology. Existing, taking up space, needing time. One evening, after a particularly good day, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and paused. I looked calm, not happy in a loud way, not triumphant, just steady. And it struck me how unfamiliar that used to feel. My mother invited me to dinner for the first time since I'd moved out. The invitation was cautious, almost formal. "You don't have to," she said. I just thought, maybe. "I'll come," I replied. When I walked into her house, it felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd grown. She'd set the table carefully, lit a candle, played soft music. It felt intentional, like she was hosting someone new. "How's the apartment?" she asked as we sat. "It feels like home," I said. She nodded. "That's good." Halfway through dinner, she surprised me. She said, "I told your cousin I miss you," abruptly. I looked up. "You do?" She frowned slightly. "Of course I do." I searched her face. "That's not what you used to say." She stiffened, then relaxed. I didn't know how to say things without turning them into jokes. I said nothing. "You were always there, and I resented that sometimes. Not you, the reminder of time passing, of mistakes." My chest tightened. "I shouldn't have made you feel unwanted," she said quietly. There it was. Not perfect, not polished, but real. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, eyes fixed on her plate. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I do know, and I'm not angry anymore." She looked up then. "You're not?" "No," I said. "I just won't go back." She accepted that with a small nod. When I left that night, she hugged me. Awkwardly, briefly, but on her own initiative. Driving home, I thought about how different this ending was from the one I'd once imagined. There was no villain vanquished, no dramatic showdown, no final line that fixed everything. Just two women learning how to stand apart without collapsing. Weeks later, on her next birthday, she called me in the morning. "I made a wish last night," she said. "Oh," I replied, my eyes. "That's a good wish," I said. After we hung up, I sat by my window, coffee warm in my hands, sunlight spilling across the floor of a life I'd built deliberately, piece by piece. I thought about that first birthday,
the cake, the laughter, the wish that had broken something open. She'd said she wished she didn't have to see me every day, and I'd smiled, because sometimes the thing meant to shrink you becomes the reason you finally expand. Sometimes the quietest cruelty becomes the clearest permission. And sometimes walking away isn't abandonment. It's the first act of self-respect. The end.